Ave, true to Christ. Hello, everybody. This is Catholic Trash Talk, and today we are going to be continuing the Ecumenical Council's usual process, and hopefully I get it right this time. Sound seems to be working, so we're going to have sound on, but I'm going to play the video to give you guys an idea. I'm going to go through the intro, and then we will get right into it. But I am going to try and keep it short like usual, if I can help it. When we do get to Vatican I and II, though, that's the one I have to pay attention to the most. So those are going to be the longest videos. But anyways, let's get into it.
Boys and girls, monarchs and mailmen, welcome to episode 17 of Clarifying Catholicism. You're watching part 17 of a series on the history of the ecumenical councils according to the Catholic Church. Today, we are covering the Council of Vienne. Most of this information was gathered from Joseph Kelly's The Ecumenical Councils, the Catholic Church, A History. So if you want an in-depth dive into these topics, please make sure to pick up a copy of his book. To see the rest of our episodes, check out our playlist in the description. Without further ado, on to the show. Despite the Lateran Council reforms we covered in the last few episodes, aristocratic influence was still high in the papacy. In response to power struggles between families, the cardinals chose a highly regarded spiritual hermit, Pietro del Morone, as the next pope. He named himself Celestine V and was nicknamed the Angel Pope. Despite his saintly demeanor, he was, like many saintly people, a poor politician and administrator. Knowing he was way out of his element, he resigned after just 5 months of being pope. In 1294, replacing him was Pope Boniface VIII, who apparently advised Celestine to resign in the first place. Boniface was a master diplomat, and he feared that some might pledge their allegiance to his still-living predecessor, so he locked him up. He wasn't mistreated, though. The Crusades, having ended in 1291, were no longer the focus of European rulers, who instead took to fighting each other. Particularly, England and France warred against each other and taxed the clergy greatly to fund their fights. Boniface didn't like this and issued a papal bull to stop this excessive taxation of the clergy. The English backed down, but the French stood their ground. France stopped all funding to Rome, which threatened to bankrupt the papacy. So Boniface backed down. In the early 1300s, Boniface frequently flaunted the doctrine of papal supremacy over secular monarchs. The French responded with a propaganda war against him. Boniface responded by writing a bull, Unum Sanctum, which emphasized the necessity of subjugation to the Pope for eternal salvation. It's worth noting really quick that I've heard several people cite Unum Sanctum as an example of a document where the church condemns people who don't bow to the church's authority to hell. And they frequently use this to attack people of other Christian denominations or other religions, when clearly its purpose wasn't to address other religions, but addressing secular rulers and their refusal to bow to the Pope's authority. At some point, I'll be doing a series on the importance of intent when it comes to magisterial documents in the Catholic Church. Anyways, the French didn't like this and hatched a plot to kidnap the Pope and put him on trial. Boniface excommunicated the French king Philip, who sent armies to arrest the Pope. Boniface then declared he would rather die than go to France, a sentiment I sometimes share. So one of the French allies stepped forward with a sword to kill him, but was prevented by another French leader for obvious diplomatic reasons. The population of the city where the Pope was staying defended Boniface, and the French retreated. While Boniface survived the attack, the stress wore him down until he died 6 weeks later. The cardinals elected a Dominican theologian, Benedict XI, in 1303. Trying to seek peace between France, he forgave the French for their attempted kidnapping, then died of dysentery. What followed started the papacy's descent into chaos. After Benedict's death, the cardinals chose a French bishop who took the name Clement V. He was not on great terms with King Philip of France, and having suffered from cancer, he was not in good shape to stand up to the powerful king. Given his frailness, Clement didn't want to go to Rome, so he settled the papacy in Avignon, France, which is where the papacy would be for about 70 years. While he was there, Clement appointed many new French cardinals who reigned with him in France. This strengthened the French monarchy's grip over the papacy. Philip wanted Clement to call a council that would condemn Boniface's reforms, especially those in Unum Sanctum. There was something standing in his way, though. A military order called the Knights of Templars, yes, the ones you see on the History Channel, had been supplying Pope Clement with income. Without them, Clement would be entirely at the mercy of King Philip. So Philip unleashed a propaganda war against the Knights, accusing them of heresy, sodomy, Satanism, and more. He arrested many of the Templars and demanded Clement dissolve the order. Though he initially hesitated, Clement finally called a council in Vienne, France. It opened in 1311. Vienne's attendance was severely limited by the French monarchy, who forbade 66 bishops from attending. Clement said the council would deal with the Templars, a crusade, and reform. Now initially, the council fathers wanted representatives of the knights to attend, but fearing retaliation by King Philip, they decided not to. As soon as the session on the Templars began, Clement did something very unusual and dramatic. He announced that any member of the council who spoke would be excommunicated. Then he read his bull that suppressed the Order of the Templars, though he did not elaborate whether or not they were guilty of the crimes they had been accused of. The council did pass some anti-corruption reform, though it failed to rally support for another crusade. Shocker. European leaders were quite tired of that by this point. Philip and Clement both died shortly after the council in 1314. That's all for this episode. See you next time.
So, like the other councils, we're seeing that there's this idea of more reforms. We're seeing that there is the dealing with the Knights Templar, of trying to change the dynamics that we're seeing with the Crusades. And it's interesting how, as Rome seems to get more power and move more and more away from, further away from monarchies, there's this ebb and flow of the monarchies becoming more powerful and trying to maintain its control on the papacy. So, the Council of Vienne, I'm going to read the introduction, but the bulls and the decrees I'm going to give summaries of. But just like usual, I'll read these so you know what happens. So, we had multiple things made. We have the Vox in Excelso from March 22nd, 1312. We have the Ad Providam from May 2nd, 1312. Considerantes, May 6th, 1312. Nuper in Concilio, May 16th, 1312. The session of December 1st, 1312. Dudem, December 18th, 1312. The session on December 31st, 1312. And liked Predum, January 13th, 1313. The decrees are the rational or intelligent soul is the form of the human body of itself, and essentially the Burghards, or the Beguines, the 8 errors, and usury is a sin. So the introduction. I gotta fix my phone, one moment. My phone is really difficult with the charger, which is super awesome. The General Council of... let's activate nerd mode. Nerd mode activated. Actually, the General Council of Vienne was summoned by Pope Clement V with the bull Regnanus in Chalice, which he had written on August 12, 1308. The Poiters, the Roman pontiff, had remained in France for the year of his election, thus beginning the period of the Church's history known as the Avignon captivity. The Pope was subject to forceful pressure from the European states, particularly from France. Philip IV of France, the king who had opposed Boniface the Eighth so bitterly, had so much power over Clement V that he seems to have been able to change the whole state of ecclesiastical affairs at will. The Council of Vienne is seen as an outstanding example of this political pressure. Although the Pope energetically defended the liberty of the Church as far as circumstances allowed, and he himself had the power, the council had been summoned for October 1st, 1310, at Vienne. The city did not belong to the Kingdom of France, though Philip IV in 1310 had occupied nearby Lyons by force. There were no general summons, and only 231 ecclesiastes were invited. The others, however, could employ a procurator. The complaint against the Templars seems to have been the first and greatest concern of the council. Thus, the bull convoking the council was written at the same time as Clement V summoned the Templar order to a canonical inquiry. Though the whole of Europe, cases were heard concerning the order and the individual Templars. This work had not been completed by 1310, and so the Pope deferred the opening of the council to October 1st, 1311. Events had moved, however, in such a way that the Templars' condemnation of Philip's victory seemed very probable. This placed the authority and freedom of the council under severe constraint. The council began at Vienne in October 16th, 1311, in the presence of 20 cardinals, 4 patriarchs, and about 100 archbishops and bishops, and a number of abbots and priors. From the sermon given in the first session by Clement V, 3 questions were seen as the greatest of importance: the case of the Templars, the business of the Holy Land, and the reform of the Church. Clement himself gave an account of the allegations which had been made against the Templar order. The work of the council was carried on outside the full assembly, that is to say, through the consistency of the cardinals together with the Pope, and through a committee which was elected by the council fathers from their own body, and which seems to have acted in the place of the whole council. The full assembly merely confirmed the decrees and bulls, promulgating them in the second and third sessions. A commission of the cardinals was appointed in order to probe the grievances and advice put forward by the bishops and the fathers on the subject of church reform. The council fathers gave long and careful consideration to the case of the Templars. It is likely that they preferred to the order to be allowed to defend itself against accusations than to condemn it too easily without sure proof. However, quote, all the difficult questions which were considered in the council seem to have been left doubtful or unsettled, or else to be treated, end quote. So when the case was still unresolved, in January 1312, the fathers devoted themselves to business of the Holy Land and to the decrees which seemed timely for the reform of the ecclesiastical morals. Regarding the former, the delegates of the King of Aragon thought the city of Granada should first be attacked and occupied in order that the enemy might be enfeebled by the threat to each flank. Other fathers and ambassadors favored an expedition to the east only. As far as we know, however, after an agreement by kings and princes that a crusade to the Holy Land was opportune and necessary, and the imposition of a tithe on all ecclesiastical provinces, no decision was taken. Meanwhile, in March 1312, Philip IV held a general assembly of his kingdom in Lyons, his object being to disturb and steamroller the minds of the council fathers and of the Pope himself. Secret bargains had been made between Clement V and the envoys of Philip IV from February 17th to 29th in 1312. The council fathers were not consulted. By this bargaining, Philip obtained the condemnation of the Templars. It is most likely that he used the threat that he would bring the public action against Boniface VIII. The King of France made for Vienne on March 20th, and after 2 days, Clement V delivered to the Commission of Cardinals for the approval of the bull, which by the order of the Templars was suppressed. The bull Vox in Ecclesio. In the second session of the council, which took place on April 3rd, 1312, this bull was approved and the Pope announced a future crusade. The Templars' property, of immense value, was entrusted to other persons by the bulls ad providam of May 2nd and Nuper in Concilio of May 16th. The fate of the Templars themselves was decided by the bull Considerantes of May 6th in the bulls Licet Dudem, December 18th, 1312, Dudem in General Concilio, December 31st, 1312, and Licet Predem, January 13th, 1313. Clement V gave further treatment to the question of the Templars' property in the third session of the council, which was held on May 6, 1312. Certain constitutions were promulgated. We do not know their text or number. In the Muller's opinion, what happened was this: the constitutions, with the exception of a certain number still to be polished in form and text, were read by the council fathers. Clement V then ordered the constitutions to be ordered. The constitutions be corrected and arranged after the pattern of the dectral collections. This text, although read in the consistory held in the castle of Montague, Montague. I can't read French. This is like Outer Worlds. If you guys have ever the video game, there's a priest who he wants to read French. You can look it up on YouTube, but he's like, what is this? French? I can't effing read French. It's so funny. Near Carpentras on March 21st, 1314, was not promulgated, since Clement V died a month later. It was Pope John the 22nd who, after again correcting the constitutions, finally sent them to the universities. It is difficult to decide which constitutions are the work of the council. We adopt Muller's opinion that the 38 constitutions may be counted as such, but only 20 of these have the words, quote, with the approval of the Sacred Council, end quote. The texts that we publish are taken from Heffel's edition. And this is more references and whatnot. So like usual, I'm going to read and I will give you a summary. There is a lot of different summaries I'm going to have to give, so this will be fun. So I will be back. So the first one is basically talking about that for the first bull that we were seeing, which let me see if I can get any specific information on it. The bull and ordinances of the Roman Curia concerning the order of the Templars and the business of the Holy Land. They were talking about the fact that it seems that Philip was trying to take the Knights Templars' property, which is very lucrative, and trying to profit off of it. And so they're trying to do everything within their power to follow the ecclesiastical rules set up by the previous councils when it came to property. So we weren't having property being mismanaged of the church. Because as we've seen in a lot of the previous councils, there's an idea of the bishops are the ones that are supposed to be in charge of the property when a church falls under, or when we're regarding church matters in general. So next is going to be the March 22nd, in the 7th year of our pontificate, the bull that was done on that day. And I will be back after reading it. This is reinforcing before what was said, that we got to realize that all this property, all these resources that the Knights Templar have been using, and in their dissolvement essentially, that there's a lot that needs to be divvied up, and to properly do so would be terrible. And it's important that we maintain these resources of the church properly and responsibly. So then we have what was said on May 2nd in Vienne. So a lot of the points were basically the same. I didn't really see anything that stood out that was worth mentioning, so I skipped a bunch of things. But now we get into the decrees, and just like before, I will pause, I'll read it, and I'll get back to you guys. Alright, so a lot of, just like before in the bulls, we see that there's a lot of talk about property, the Holy Land, but also how to hold decorum in a religious order and how to properly operate in a religious order. And as much as we could go into it, a lot of it's already been expanded on and built upon the previous councils, so it would just be retreading the same ground. But I did want to share with you guys the 8 heresies of the Beguines. 1. First, the person in this present life can acquire a decree of perfection which renders him utterly impeccable and unable to make further progress in grace. For, as they say, if someone could always make further progress, he could become more perfect than Christ. And this kind of challenges that idea of sanctification in the Methodist sense of that hypothetically, there is a point where you could become sinless. And this council is rejecting that. 2, secondly, that it is not necessary to fast or pray after gaining this degree of perfection, for then the sensitive appetite has been so perfectly subjected to the spirit and to reason that one may freely grant the body whatever it pleases. 3rd, that those who have reached that degree of perfection in the spirit of liberty, they are not subject to human obedience nor obliged to any commandments of the church. For as they say, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Fourthly, I don't understand why they have it lined up with this, if they're just going to have the numbers. That a person can gain in this life a final beatitude in every degree of perfection that will be obtained in the life of the blessed. Fifthly, that any intellectual nature in itself is naturally blessed, and that the soul does not need the light or glory to elevate to see God and to enjoy Him blissfully. Sixthly, the practice of virtues belongs to the state of imperfection, and the perfect soul is free from viruses, from virtues. Seventhly, that to kiss a woman is a mortal sin. Yeah, stay a kissless virgin, since nature does not incline one to do it, but the act of intercourse is not a sin. What? Especially in the time of temptation, since it is an inclination of nature. Yo, that's wild. That one caught me off guard. I can't believe they thought that. Eighthly, that at the elevation of the body of Jesus Christ, they ought to not rise or show reverence to it. It would be an imperfection for them to come down from the purity and height of their contemplation, so far as to think about the ministry or sacrament of the Eucharist, or about the passion of Christ as man. So let's break this down. So we have the 8 errors that the wicked men, the beghards, and the faithless women, the beguines. The first error, we're seeing that what I was talking about, Methodism, where or from kind of like an Anglican angle of Thomas Wesley. But anyways, the idea is that there's a point where you could become sinless through sanctification, but then that would and that seeking impeccable. We're always in a process, and we're never going to be perfect like Christ. But the second point, that once we're there, once we have become sinless, now we can indulge in any sin we want, which is a crazy thought. Third, when you also get to this degree of perfection in the spirit of liberty, you don't have to give the same obedience and follow the church because of the state that you've gotten into. This is kind of like an idea of start of Reformed thinking, right? Where we're going towards this Reformed direction in the church for the Reformers, and this is kind of like paving the way for what's to come. Fourth point, that you can obtain perfection before you go to heaven, essentially. Fifth, that we don't need God's grace to be able to understand him or enjoy him, which is also crazy. Sixth point. You no longer need to be virtuous when you enter that perfect status, that now it's unnecessary for you to have to live out the virtues, which is a crazy statement. And I still can't wrap my head around this on the seventh one of kissing a woman is a mortal sin, because nature does not incline one to do it, but having sex is not a sin, especially in a time of temptation, because that's an inclination of nature, which that is just wild. But and then the eighth point, that we ought not to show, there's like this iconoclasm going on where we ought not to show the reverence or rise for the body and blood of the Lord. And this is kind of like the idea of where we're going towards the symbolic route. And so this is the embers, well, maybe not the embers, but the starting fire of the reformers that we're seeing. But I will get back to reading, and I will be back to you soon. So, other than what we already saw, guys, I don't really see anything else worth mentioning. A lot of it is pretty dry, and a lot of it is basically a lot of the stuff we've seen before. But still got to read it. So if you want to read it yourself, you can go to description. You can read all the councils. It's all one big document. You can see it's 1,600 pages, so who knows how long it'll take me to get through this whole document. Or I might even need to not read the whole document. I think it's like 400 pages. Maybe about 400 pages is all the councils. And the rest is just like church documents, which is pretty interesting. But anyways, guys, that is everything. Feel free to bully me in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong. I look forward to hearing from you guys. I hope you guys have a blessed day. Peace be with you, and bye.